that at many occasions he stressed the importance of simcha, of joy. And it's extremely specific in this week's Chazarah. What is this week's Chazarah? Parshas Pinchas. If we look through the Chazarah, what is discussed in the Chazarah? One of the inyanim which is discussed at length is regarding the korbanos which were brought on Yom Tovim. Other details pertaining Yom Tovim are not discussed in this week's Chazarah. However, the details regarding the korbanos, this is what the Torah tells us about in Parshas Pinchas. What is the meaning of a korban? Together with a korban comes also the pouring of the wine. There was a pouring of wine that came along together with every korban. What is the meaning of wine? The Rebbe continues. Wine brings simcha. Yain is mesameach elakim va'anoshem. Brings simcha, brings happiness to God and to people. So Mamela, we right away have in this week's Chazarah a stress about the importance of simcha. And in fact, the Torah goes through all of the Yom Tovim, from Rosh Chodesh, including all the Yom Tovim, until the Torah comes to Shmini Atzeres. What the meaning of Shmini Atzeres? Shmini Atzeres we celebrate after Sukkot. During the Yom Tov of Sukkot, we read in the Torah that there were a lot of korbanos brought. Why that many korbanos? So it's explained that it's brought 70 korbanos during Sukkot, and this corresponds to the 70 nations. Because the truth is that who guards the 70 nations, who watches them, it is also the Rebishter, and it's through the Beis HaMikdash. As it's brought in Svarim that the nations don't even know how much help and security and assistance they get through the Beis HaMikdash. They were getting through the Beis HaMikdash. Had they have known, their attitude would have been entirely different. Then the Torah tells us that we celebrate Shmini Atzeres. What's the meaning of Shmini Atzeres? Atzeres Tiyah Lachem. This is a small party which is a celebration of the Eibishter and Yisrael, V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yidden, and the Eibishter, and nobody else. This is the celebration of Shmini Atzeres. In other words, the highest level of simcha that we come through after celebrating the Yom Tov of Sukkot and all the individual days in Sukkot, then we come to Shmini Atzeres. So Shmini Atzeres is an expression of extreme association of the Eibishter and Yidden. And the association is such an extent that there's nobody involved. And Rashi brings a mashal of a king that said to his son, he will make a celebration where nobody else will participate, only the king and him. So it's an intimate, close celebration between the king, the Rabbeinu Shloim, and Yidden. This is what Shmini Atzeres stands for. Which this is also a meaning of Simcha. What is the beginning of the Chazarah? The beginning of the Chazarah is about Pinchas. What do we read about Pinchas? That the Rebishter said, Hineni noisen loy es berisi shalom. The Rebishter said he's given him a covenant, to whom? To Pinchas, shalom, in peace. Why did Pinchas get this? As a result of what we read about at the end of last week's Chazarah, where Pinchas went ahead and sacrificed himself and endangered himself to protect the honor, to protect the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he went ahead and he killed Zimri ben Saul. This led to the reward that the Rebishter rewarded him, that Hineni noisen lo yesperisi shalom. So what did really Pinchas accomplish? What Pinchas accomplished was, he brought together Yidden and the Rebishter. After there was a rift between Yidden and the Rebishter, and he brought them together. Bringing together Yidden and the Rebishter, this in itself is a meaning of simcha and a meaning of happiness. And particularly, after there was a rift in between, and Pinchas was the one that was successful and in mending that and tying Yidden and the Rebishter together again, so this is yet more an union of simcha. So again, we find in the Chazarah the union of simcha. Obviously, this corresponds to what we've been talking at previous occasions regarding simcha during the 3 weeks. that simcha during the 3 weeks is something important, but naturally it has to be such type of a simcha which is in accordance with halacha, the type of a simcha we're allowed to do during the 3 weeks, because there are limitations al pi halacha, there are certain simchas which we're simply not allowed to have during the 3 weeks. But other than that, the avodah in the 3 weeks has to be an avodah b'simcha. There's a taich which the Rebbe mentioned many times. He didn't mention it today. It's a chassidische taich. The expression in Shulchan Aruch is Mishenichnas Ov Mimatin B'Simcha. When Ov begins, we minimize in Simcha. Here's a chassidische taich. Mishenichnas Ov Mimatin. When Ov comes, when it comes the period of Ov, in general the period of 3 weeks, how do we reduce, how do we minimize in all of the unwanted inyanim of the 3 weeks, in all of the inyanim bilti retziyim of the 3 weeks, how do we do all this? Through simcha. On the contrary, it's by serving the Rebishter with simcha, that's how we can achieve to dissolve all the unwanted and undesirable inyanim that have to do with the 3 weeks. The Rebbe didn't mention this explanation specifically today, but I imagine that we can mention it because this corresponds to the inyanim which he stressed very strongly in this sichos. And what is our goal? That ultimately it will be that these days where we have days of fast day, we have the fast day of Shivat B'Tammuz, and later 3 weeks later we have the fast day of Tisha B'Av. We hope that Hayomim Ha'elu, these days will be converted to days of Sasan and Simcha, days of joy and happiness. So the Rebbe is explaining that a Yid has to understand that what is the ultimate goal of the avodah of the 3 weeks, so that we will come to the simcha that will come afterwards. Being that l'maisi yadecha tichseif, the desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to the deeds of Yidden. So the Rebishter made a yerida, he let us down, which this is the whole Indian of the Chum, the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. However, a Yid has to understand that the letdown, the falling down, the yerida, is not chas v'sholom that we should remain at a level of yerida. Just like the entire yerida of the neshama into this world. The entire yerida of the neshama is such that it should achieve and come to higher madreges, yet higher than the neshama had before it came down into this world. The same when we're talking about the yerida, about the Indian of the 3 weeks, the kavanah, the intention is the same. The yerida is such, we were let down. However, this letdown should lead us to an uplifting, to such an uplifting which is no way comparison to the level which we had before. And the Yid has to understand this, and the Yid has to know this. And how is this achieved? As the expression of the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, through ma'aseinu v'avodaseinu. It is through our acts and our doing, our deeds. It's dependent on us. And by a Yid, through his maisim, can see to it that we will reach to a yet higher madrega than we were before the Yerida, before the whole undesirable union of the 3 weeks happened. And here the Rebbe expressed himself that in general, this approach is to every Yid. A Yid always has to see that he has to keep on going higher and higher. Expressed himself that you approach a Yid who is a member of the Am Chacham V'Novin, the intelligent nation of intelligent people and understandable people. And you tell him that as a member of the Am Chacham V'Novin, you could have accomplished and achieved much more than you did accomplish till now. And Memela, this also leads that a Yid will go to a higher and yet higher madregas. And the same when we're talking in Torah and the level of Torah, it's also that when Mashiach will come, the level of Torah will also be a higher level. As the expression goes, Torah Chadosha Me'iti Teitzei. So the Yerida which we have now is, a Yid has to understand why is all of this. He has to see what will come out later. Later the outcome will be that this Yerida will lead to an aliyah, to an uplifting which is no comparison to the level which we were standing before. It actually is expressed in the words of Hayomim Mo'elu Yahafchu L'Sasin U'Simcha, that these days will be converted to days of Sasin and Simcha. Here the Rebbe brought in Chazal that when Mashiach will come, Kol HaMoyadim B'Teilim, all the Yomim Tovim will become bottled, will be dissolved, except for Purim, I think the Chazal say. So Chassidus asks, how can we say that all the Moyadim, all the Yomim Tovim will be dissolved? The Torah tells us that these are Yomim Tovim which we have to celebrate. So what do we say? That when Mashiach will come, these are not going to be Yomim Tovim any longer. How can we say a thing like that? So Chassidus explains, doesn't mean that these are not going to be Yomim Tovim. It means that being that we are going to be living in such an era, when the days are going to be such high madrege days, that the Yom Tov will be, so Rebbe used the expression, kishraga b'tihara, just like in the middle of the afternoon, middle of a bright sunny afternoon. If somebody is going to light a candle, or put on the light, we can understand that the light doesn't add anything, it doesn't give on any more light. Why? Because we're in the middle of a bright afternoon. The sun is out there shining. The same, the plus which a Yom Tov gives to us today, it's a big inyan. However, when Mashiach will come, every single day of the year, we'll be living in such a period when it will be Hayomim Ha'elu Yahafchu L'Sasin U'Simcha. Memela, the Yom Tov we will have a Yom Tov, no question about it. We will have it, and we will obey all the halachas that are involved with the Yom Tov. But at the same time, it's going to be kishraga b'tiyara, just like putting on a candle in the midst of an afternoon when the sun is out bright shining. It doesn't add anything. The same, being that every day, every single day of the year are going to be days with such revelations of godliness that in no way does it compare to what a Yom Tov is. This is what the world will be like when Mashiach will come. So that is the meaning what Chazal tell us, that Kol HaMoyadim B'Teilim, it doesn't Chas v'Shalom mean that we will no longer fulfill the halachas of the Yom Tov. Chas v'Shalom, how can we say that? It'll come Pesach, we'll have to eat matzah, it'll come Sukkot, we'll eat in the Sukkot, and so forth. However, we're talking about the spiritual revelation of godliness, which a Yom Tov stands for. This will be insignificant then, and we wouldn't pay much attention to it. Why? Because every day is going to be full of a revelation of godliness. Then the Rebbe continued, this applies to every year. However, in specific years, we can derive a special lesson, the way the setup of that specific year is, and by deriving this lesson, we can carry the message into further years as well, even though that in other years the calendar setup is not such. What is the calendar setup of this year? The calendar is set up this year in a way that Shivasa B'Tammuz comes out on a Tuesday. What is the inyan of a Tuesday? The inyan of a Tuesday is a day shehuchfal boi ki toiv. The creation of the world, toiv. Expression is vayar Elokim, the Rebbe to realize that it is good. It is mentioned twice on Tuesday. So the Rebbe at many occasions stresses that Tuesday is a special day because the word good in the creation of Tuesday is mentioned twice. Huchfal boi ki toiv. So obviously, it's something very strange. Here we are talking that it's a day of fast. It's a day when something undesirable took place. And at the same time we are stressing the fact that when does the fast come out? The fast comes out on a day of Tuesday which is a day of Tuchfal Boikitay. And the same the Rebbe says, there is interpretation required in general regarding to a fast day. On one day we say that we fast on this day because this is a day when something undesirable took place. On the other hand, we say that a day of fast is a Yom Rotzein. It's a day, a suitable day to excel in tefillah and davening and so forth. How do these two things go hand in hand? If on one hand we say that on this day we fast because something on which we didn't want, something negative happened on that day, and on the other hand we say that this is a suitable day for tefillah. Furthermore, we find in Svarim, we want to know the setup of the calendar of Yomim Tovim. We are given a rule. The rule is At Bash. What does At Bash mean? We are used to an Aleph base of Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, and so forth. So in our Aleph base, Aleph is the first letter, and Taf is the last letter. However, the Svarim it is brought that there are other Aleph bases as well. One of the Aleph bases which is brought in Svarim is an Aleph base of At Bash. At Bash means the first and the last, Aleph and Taf, the second and the one next to the last, Beis and Shin, and etc. Then we go down to Gimel and Reish, Dalet, and Kuf, and so forth. According to the Aleph base of At Bash, we have a clue how the calendar of Yom Tovim goes. It goes according to the days of Pesach. Aleph, when it is the first day of Pesach. Taf is Tisha B'Av. The same day of the week that the first day of Pesach will fall out, the first day of Pesach will be on a Tuesday, as we had this year. Tisha B'Av will be on Tuesday. Bash, the second day of Pesach, always the first day of Shavuos will be that same day. For example, this year, the second day of Pesach was on a Wednesday. Shin, Shavuos, came out on the same day, and so forth. So the Rebbe asks, how can we give such a rule? Say, At Bash. What does At mean? Aleph, we are talking about the first day of Pesach. What is the first day of Pesach? That is the day when we were taken out of Mitzrayim. The day of going out of Mitzrayim is a day of so much significance. It expresses the message of Chayros, the message of freedom, to such an extent that the Pasuk tells us, Ki meitzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu niflos. When the Pasuk talks and gives us a description about what will happen when Mashiach will come, it is compared to what happened when we left Mitzrayim. So we see that Mitzrayim, leaving Mitzrayim, stands as an indicator and for what will happen when Mashiach will come. So great is the inyan of leaving Mitzrayim, particularly the first day. First day, which is Be'etzem Hayoyim Hazeh, the first day of Pesach, when we left Mitzrayim. When did that day begin? The day began from Chatzos, from midnight of the night towards Tesvav. The Rebbe said when we're talking about midnight, the general rule in a night is that every minute of the night till Chatzos, it gets darker. From Chatzos and later, it gets lighter. So Mamela, when did Yitzias Mitzrayim begin? Yitzias Mitzrayim began as of Chatzos. Midnight of the night to the 15th. Until later throughout the day, this is the first day of Yitzias Mitzrayim, that is when the eagle left Mitzrayim. What are we told here? We are told, compare the first day of going out of Mitzrayim, and that has a parallel that the same day of the week that day comes out, the same day of the week we have Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the total contrary to the inyan of Yitzias Mitzrayim, and primarily the first day of Yitzias Mitzrayim. So the Rebbe explains, The Inyan, here we have the whole Inyan of Tisha B'Av. And Tisha B'Av, which carries within itself the message of the 3 weeks, and as we just mentioned, the same day of the week that Tisha B'Av comes out, which is the closing of the 3 weeks, the same day of the week, Shivasa B'Tammuz comes out, which is the beginning of the 3 weeks, and both of them are on a Tuesday, which means that both of them are on the first day of Pesach. What does this show? This shows that what is the ultimate goal of all the inyanim of Tisha B'Av, all the inyanim of the 3 weeks, which is expressed in Tov. Tov is also the furthest letter in the Aleph Beis. It's not the letter which we are used to a system of Aleph Beis Gimel. What is next to Aleph Beis? Here we say Tov. Tov is the furthest letter from Aleph Beis. Just like it is furthest in the system, that means it is the lowest level. What is the Avodah V'Yid? The Avodah V'Yid is to take the Tov, which is the Inyan of Tisha B'Av, the Inyan of the 3 weeks, which is something which expresses an Inyan of Yerida, a letdown, coming down into a lower Madrege. And what does the Rebishter want from us? That a Yid should take this letter, Tov, and tie it together with the Aleph, with the first Madrege. Through the Rebishter has given us these kaiches, the strength, that a Yid should be able, with his Avodah, during the time of the 3 weeks, that he should be able to, that ultimately, what would happen of these days, that this Tov would reach to the level of Aleph. Talking about this Inyan, the Rebbe also mentioned Beis Shin. What Beis Shin means, the second day of Pesach, has a shaykhus to Shavuos. And here the Rebbe says the relation between these two Inyanim is a very simple one. Why? Because what was the ultimate goal of Yitzias Mitzrayim, as the Pasuk tells us, "V'hitziacha sa'om miMitzrayim, tavdun es Elokim al har hazeh." When the nation will be taken, when Rebbe says to Moshe, when he will take the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, they will worship the Eibishter on this mountain, on the mountain of Sinai. So what does this show us? This shows the connection that what is the secondary union, what came right after the exodus of Mitzrayim, going out of Mitzrayim. Right after that comes Torah. Memela Aleph is Yitzias Mitzrayim. Beis, which is the second step of Yitzias Mitzrayim, or rather the ultimate goal of Yitzias Mitzrayim, is that we should come to Shin, which is Shavuos, which is the union of Matan Torah. And here in this Sikha, the Rebbe began also to talk about the importance of seeing to it that every Jewish child is treated properly during the summer months, meaning that children are in a proper environment, an environment of a proper camp, which will teach Yiddishkeit, Torah through Yiddishkeit, to each and every child. And it's the obligation of each and every one of us to reach out to every child and see to it that every child becomes familiar with Torah mitzvahs, gets a proper education during the summer months to familiarize him with Torah mitzvahs. It's not the child's fault, the Rebbe continues, that the child was not taught anything about Yiddishkeit. Because the child is what we would call a tinuk shenishba, a youngster, a child, which was captured, right? Captured by outside influences and by an outside environment, and therefore the child was not given an authentic Torah chinuch. However, what is our obligation? It is our obligation and our responsibility to reach out to all these children and see to it that they get a proper education during the summer months, should be utilized to see that these children reach a Torah true Jewish camp where they will get a proper Yiddish chinuch. Rebbe says, we're talking to people who were never involved in such type of work. We're talking about somebody who already has a weiße Bart, has a white beard, and he sits back and he says, what do you want from me? How can you demand from me to get involved in such type of work? At the time I never did it. I didn't do it in all my years of involvement to go out and reach out to children, that children should get a proper chinuch during the summer. So the Rebbe says, listen, we are all awaiting the Torah Chadasha Me'iti Teitzei. What does Torah Chadasha Me'iti Teitzei mean? which we just spoke about, the pasuk which refers to we are waiting for the coming of Mashiach, when Mashiach will teach Torah to each one of us. If we are waiting for the Torah Chadasha, then we all have to be involved in this Avodah Chadasha, in this new task, which is the obligation of each and every one of us to make sure that we see to it that every child gets a proper Torah education, and particularly to utilize the summer months, that the summer months should be utilized for Torah Chinuch, to acquaint children with true Torah education. Talking about the summer months, Rebbe went into another ring. He said there's a strange custom, which he says he doesn't, which has originated late, in recent years, and this is the concept of vacation. Vacation as far as children from learning Torah. And it has affected yeshivas and Talmud Torahs and so forth. And this is something which there is no ground for it. Rebbe says there is a medrash. The medrash talks about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So the medrash says, Vitar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave in to the fact that the Yidden did not fulfill these three Averes of Yehareg Val Yaveh. In other words, we know that there are three Averes which a person is supposed to sacrifice his life on. Even though they didn't do that, the Rebishter overlooked. However, Leivita, the Rebishter did not overlook Al Bittul Torah, and the fact that the learning of Torah is neglected. The Rebbe says, if we open the Tanya, we see right away that on the first parak of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explains the severeness of neglecting the learning of Torah, the inyan of Bittul Torah. The Mela, the Rebbe appealed very strongly that the summer has to be used out for learning of Torah. The whole inyan of vacation is something she doesn't understand. Vacation of learning Torah, he doesn't understand where this comes from. And particularly the Rebbe spoke to the Bacharim in Temchet Mimim, students in Temchet Mimim. Says today, Baruch Hashem, we are living in a different time than we lived 60 years ago. 60 years ago, why does he mention the number 60? Because now we are celebrating 60 years from Yud Beis Tammuz. 60 years ago, for a yeshiva bacha to learn Torah, it was a question of him sacrificing his life. It was a question something which demanded from him a tremendous amount of dedication. Today, Baruch Hashem, we are living in a time when yeshiva bacharim are being paid to learn Torah. Remember, all the yeshiva bacha has to do is make sure that he does his share, and his share is one thing, to make sure that he learns. If it's a question of making meetings amongst yeshiva bacharim, or congregating amongst yeshiva bacharim, you know what it's for? For one simple reason. Yeshiva bacharim have a right and a permission and an authority to make meetings when they want to meet, how to understand the Rambam better, how to understand an Indian and learning better. But meetings which deal with other type of things that are not related to the learning of Torah, that's something that has nothing to do with yeshiva bacharim. It doesn't have to do with yeshiva bacharim, and yeshiva bacharim are not to be involved into such type of meetings. All a yeshiva bacha is supposed to know is that his inyan is the learning of Torah. In fact, there is a kuntaras written by the Rebbe Rashab, who was the founder of Yeshiva Temchet Mimim, and the name of the kuntaras is Eitz HaChayim, a tree of life. And in that kuntaras, the Rebbe Rashab, the founder of Temchet Mimim, explains in detail what the obligation of the tamim of a student in Temchet Mimim is, and to what extent he has to be devoted to the learning of Torah. As it's customary in the Farbrengens, the Rebbe discusses an inyan in Pirkei Avos, and also an inyan in the Rashi of this week's Sedre, and an inyan in Rambam. And the Rebbe also brought to our attention again that we utilize the 3 weeks for the learning of inyanim that have a shayches to Beis HaMikdash, whether it is in Tanakh in the Novi of Yecheskel, or in Gemara, Masechta Midas, or in the Rambam, in the halachas of Beis HaBchir, and the halachas that deal with Beis HaMikdash. And also, to add on during the 3 weeks to increase in the giving of tzedakah. This is based on the pasuk Tzion b'mishpat tipada v'shaveha b'tzedakah. Tzion, which refers to Knesset Yisrael, to Yidden, to Am Yisrael, will be redeemed, will be taken out of Golus through mishpat. What is the meaning of mishpat? It means the learning of Torah. Torah referred to here as the name of mishpat. V'shaveha b'tzedakah. And those who, and its captives will be taken out of Golus by an increase in stock. Usually in the Farbrengens, during the 3 weeks, the Rebbe learns an Indian, explains an Indian in the Rambam of Hilchas Beis HaBchira. However, being that in the Shiurim of Rambam, which I learned these days, there's also not specifically the halachas of Beis HaBchira, but it's also halachas that deal with the Beis HaMikdash. So Rebbe learned one of those halachas and explained it. Raised questions in it. In fact, there is an edition which was published last year, the Rambam, Hilchas Beis HaBchira of the Rambam, together with many of the Rebbe's siches, which was accumulated throughout the years, where the Rebbe explains the Rambam, Hilchas Beis HaBchira. Today's Farbrengen had the Sefer with him, in front of him, and was, in fact, when he was explaining the Rambam, before he began explaining the Sikh of the Rambam, the Rebbe was turning the pages in the Sefer as well. Let us look into the Rashi first. It's the Rashi in Parshas Pinchas. In fact, in Parshas Pinchas, Rebbe says he will choose to learn a pasuk which expresses the love of Yidden. This is what we're talking about, how the Rebishter loves Yidden. Chibasar shel Yisrael. So in general, this Sefer, which we are learning now, the Chumash actually, which we are in the midst of now, Chumash Bamidbar, in Gemara, this Chumash is referred to as Sefer HaPkudim, the Sefer of counting. Why? Because right at the beginning of Bamidbar, we find how the Yidden were counted. And right there, Rashi tells us, why are the Yidden counted? Whenever Yidden are counted, it's an expression of love. So in general, this Chumash reflects the love of the Rebishter to Yidden. But more specific, in this week's Sedra, we also have a counting of Yidden, beginning at Sheni, where the pasuk tells us, Reuven P'chei Yisrael. Reuven was the prayer of Yidden, and that is why obviously Reuven is counted first, because he is the prayer, he is the oldest. So for the pasuk, Reuven P'chei Yisrael, there's a Rashi. Mishpachas HaChanoichi. The family of Chanoich, which was a descendant of Reuven. So Rashi raises the question, why was the family is called Chanoich? Why does the Torah write HaChanoichi with an addition of a Hey, an addition of a Yud? So Rashi tells us that the Rebishter's name comes along with each and every family. A Yud and a K is the Rebishter's name. Why? Because the Ummos, the Goyim, were degrading the Yid and saying, if the Yidden were controlled by the Goyim when the Yidden were in exile in Mitzrayim, so if they controlled their bodies, they definitely controlled the purity of their family life, they controlled their wives. So therefore, the Goyim were trying to create a stain on the Yiddish families, on the descendants of the Yiddish families. So the Rebishter here is saying that the Rebishter's name is protecting each and every Shevet, to show that each and every Shevet is a pure Shevet without any mixture, chas v'shalom, of any strange blood in them. So that's why before at the end of every name, there's a Hey and a Yud. The Rebbe raised the question, first of all, why is it set up in a Hey and Yud? The Rebishter's name is Yud and K. The Yud first and the Hey later. But again, I don't think he answered this, but again, this is how the Psukim here are set up. Besides, for one family, one
Yimna. Later in the Torah, there's a mention in the Chazarah, a family Yimna. For Yimna, there is no need to add on a Yud and a K, because they have it within their name. And in fact, there it is, Kisidron. In other words, in its order, first the Yud and then the K. But for all other families that are mentioned here in the Torah, there is a Yud and a K, or a K and a Yud, whatever we want to say it, added on to each and every name. Which means God's name is added on, the Rebishter's name is added on to each and every family, which is a witness on the purity of this family. Then Rashi goes on and says, V'zehu shemefurash al yidei David. And this is what David tells us in Tehillim. Shiftei Yud-Kei Eidus Li-Yisrael. A pasuk. The tribes of Yud-Kei of the Rebishter. Eidus is a witness Li-Yisrael. So what does Rashi learn in Pshat in the pasuk? That Yud-Kei, the Rebishter, is a witness. He is saying witness for the tribes of the Eden that they are pure and they were not affected by the Goyim in any way. Other raises a question we find in Rashi many times in Chumash, that Rashi quotes a pasuk in Tehillim, and not every time does Rashi mention that this was mentioned by David. Why here does Rashi say Shemefurash al yidei David? Obviously, we must say that it adds on in the understanding of the pasuk to understand that who was the one that said the pasuk in Tehillim, Shiftei Yud-Kei Eidus Li-Yisrael? David was the one that said. And also note, Rashi does not mention David HaMelech, which means it doesn't have any relation to David as a king, but to David personally. So the Rebbe is explaining this. Why was David the one that expressed the pasuk Shiftei Yud-Kei Eidus Li-Yisrael? Very simple. We find in Tanakh, even prior to the fact that David became king, when David got acquainted with Shaul, with Michal Bas Shaul, the daughter of Shaul, and there we find an expression in Navi that Shaul asked, isn't David a descendant of Moav? Because David was a descendant of Rus, so he was a descendant of Moav. Torah tells us that a descendant of Moav, Ammon and Moav, lo yavei b'kal Hashem, are not allowed to be admitted b'kal Hashem amongst Yidden. But we know the halacha is this applies only to a descendant, to a male descendant. However, the one who is a descendant of a female of Ammon or Moav is definitely permitted to join Klal Yisrael. David, true, was a descendant of Rus. Rus was a female Moaviyah. So therefore, there's nothing wrong with the children of Rus. That is why David, who felt kind of offended by someone trying to mention that there's something wrong with his purity. That is why David was the one that came out with the pasuk Shiftei Yud-Kei Eidus Li-Yisrael, that the Rebishter added his name Yud and Kei to each and every family of Bnei Yisrael as a witness on the purity of the families of Yid. There's no need to stress David HaMelech. This has nothing to do with him as Melech. However, on the other hand, it's David, mitzad his personality, mitzad him being a descendant of Rus HaMoaviyah, and he was already kind of offended by a comment which we find in Nach regarding him being a descendant of Rus. That is why he was the one that brought out this pasuk of Shiftei Yud-Kei Eidus Li-Yisrael. Regarding the beginning of the Chazarah, where we find the reward given to Pinchas, Lochin and Moir in Inoisenle is Brisi Shalom, that the Rebishter says he's giving a covenant of peace to Pinchas. The Torah tells us what happened. That Pinchas was Kinei Leilakov. He was a Mekanei Kinas Hashem. Whom did he kill? he killed Zimri, the son of Saul, who was a nasi of a family to Shimon. Rabbi asks, we know that the Torah is very careful in telling us anything bad about anyone. So why is there need here to elaborate who was Zimri, the son of Saul? And he was a nasi in the tribe of Shimon. Torah usually stays away from elaborating some evil on people. And furthermore, the question arises in Rashi. Rashi says, on the pasuk V'shem Mish Yisrael, so Rashi says, just like when we mention a tzaddik, we mention praise that comes with a tzaddik, the same way when we mention a Rosha, we mention anything which can lead to shame on the Rosha. True, but the Torah is always careful from embarrassing anyone, no matter at what level that person is. Now, furthermore, the question arises. The Torah says, Zimri, the son of Saul. What kind of shame is there in the fact that he's the son of Saul? What do we know negative about Saul that we say that the Torah, just like the Torah elaborates on the tzaddik to praise, we elaborate to degrade the Rasha? What kind of degrading is there by mentioning that he's Zimri, the son of Saul? So here the Rebbe is learning, and he's tying it in with the next Rashi, where the Rashi says, Nasi beis ov lashimoini. So Rashi tells us, this comes to tell us the greatness of Pinchas. That even though Zimri was a Nasi, this did not, from a family of Shimon, this did not hold him back in any way to go ahead and be mekani kinnas Hashem, to take revenge for the respect of HaKadosh Baruch. So on one hand, this is something which the Torah stresses, that he was a Nasi. However, which family was he a Nasi? He was a Nasi of the family of Shimon. The child is already familiar from previous psukim that Shimon was not from the most respected, most chashav shvatim. In fact, the child will remember what he learned in Birchas Yankiv. When Yaakov is talking to the Shvatim, he's addressing Shimon the Levi Achim. They are brothers. What are they? They are people that are ready to kill. They are fast to kill. They are easily getting involved with the problem. So Mamela, the question, where is there the gnai, the shame, where the Torah is elaborating regarding Zimri? This is very simple. This is by the fact telling us that Zimri was the son of Saul. Members in the Shevet of Shimon, they were not, wasn't the Choshev Shevet, it's a Shevet, like it's just mentioned in the Pasuk, Shimon the Levi Achim Klei Mechoraseyim, and Memele, this is the Genai, this is the shame which the Torah is telling us regarding Zimri. Why is the Torah elaborating that he was the Nasi of Shimon? This is like Rashi already says, that even though he was a leader of the tribe, he didn't hesitate to go ahead and kill him because he was out to protect the covenant of Hashem. Rabbi also mentioned the Eira Chaim HaKodesh, commentary on Chumash from the Eira Chaim, whose Yom HaYilula, Yom HaYistalkos, the day that he passed away, was this past Sunday, Tesvav Tammuz. So Mamela, this is the Shabbos that elevates the entire week, including the day of his Yom HaYistalkos. And there is an Eira Chaim HaKodesh in this week's Sedre that takes apart the pasuk Tzoreres HaMidyanim v'Yikisa Moisam. Hate the Midyanites v'Yikisa Moisam, we shall hit them. So the Chaim HaKodesh asks, why is there a double expression in the Torah? Number one, Tzoreres HaMidyanim, hate them, and v'Yikisa Moisam. And he answers, gets into whatever answer he's answering. But the question arises, why doesn't Rashi give any mention to it? But it says it's very simple. Rashi is not going to get involved with such type of a question because the child who learns Chumash sees it's very simple. There are two separate inyanim. One is Tzoreres HaMidyanim, is one inyan, and a hatred to Midyan. And the Yikisa Moisam is a separate thing. So Rashi is not going to raise a question why the Torah, it's not a double expression. Why the Torah expresses itself twice. It's not twice, it's two separate inyanim. However, the Chaim HaKodesh, who's not limited to Pshat, as Rashi is, he gets involved in an interpretation. What is the meaning of Tzroyim and what is the meaning of Yikisa Moisam? As far as the Rambam, Rebbe raised a very interesting question. And that is in regard to the Urim V'Tumim. We know that a Kohen Gadol had an Urim V'Tumim, which was worn as part of the ephod, which was one of the garments worn by the Kohen Gadol. And when a question which required a response for a community, not something which related to somebody private, but something which affected Klal Yisrael, whether it was a question to go into a war, not to go into a war, a similar type of questions, the question would come to the Kohen Gadol, and the answer would be given through the Urim V'Tumim. In other words, the answer would be lit up on letters. There was a lettering on the Urim V'Tumim, various words were on the Urim V'Tumim, and the letters that would put together a response to this specific question would shine, and this would give the response. So the Rambam at the end of Halachas Klei HaMikdash gives a description how this transpired. So the Rambam said that the Kohen would stand in front of the Orim. The one who asked the question, whether it was a general, would ask a question about going into war, or anybody else who would represent a tzibur, a community, would stand ma'achoirav, would stay in back of the Kohen Gadol, facing the Kohen Gadol. The Omer HaShoyel, the Rambam says that one who was questioning would say, should we go into war, shouldn't we? He's giving this an example. He doesn't ask in a loud voice, speaks low as if he'd be speaking to himself, and immediately the response would come up. And the Kohen would tell him the answer. The Rambam gets into more details, don't ask two things at once, and so forth. He says, let's understand what does the Rambam say. Where was the Kohen standing? Lifnei ha'orin. Where was the Orin? The Orin is in Kodesh HaKadoshim. We know that the Torah tells us, B'zois Yova Yaron ala Kodesh, a special pasuk, special rules and regulations when Aaron was permitted to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. When was that? Only in Yom Kippur. And there are specific halachas as far as Tvilos, as far as being himself toivel before he entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There was a special Kiddush Yoda Veragla of his hand and feet had to be sanctified by pouring water from the kiyah before he entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And here the Rambam tells us, without any special, without any noting it anything special, anything out of the ordinary, makes it very simple. That the Kohen would enter in front of the Or, and the one, but not only the Kohen, the one who asked the question, who may very well be a Yisrael, is also joining the Kohen Gadol, and going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. How is he allowed to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim? How is he allowed to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim? And what kind of prerequisites does he have to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Are these halachas of special tefillas being zechtoivel, that apply to the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur? Does this apply here as well, or doesn't it? And the Rambam doesn't say anything. How was he permitted to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim? But it says, what are you going to say? You'll say that in the second Beis HaMikdash there was no Urim V'Tumim, and maybe these halachas of the Rambam were not relevant to the second Beis HaMikdash. What's going to be in the third Beis HaMikdash? The third Beis HaMikdash, we will have the Urim V'Tumim. And if we'll have a question to ask in the Urim V'Tumim, what will be the procedure? Says, you're probably thinking of an answer, being that the pasuk says, "Nebu b'neichem b'bnei that when Mashiach will come, there will be a time that our children will be saying prophecy, and everybody is going to be saying prophecy. So that is why we wouldn't have to come on to the Urim V'Tumim. We will know what to do." So it says this is not a halachic approach. This is an inyan of neis, and seimchen ala neis. We don't rely on miracles when it's a question of halacha. And therefore, Why doesn't the Rambam mention how was the Kohen Gadol permitted to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim? And even the Rebbe says, if we were to take in consideration this period, the time of the Bayis HaShlishi, when our children are going to be prophets, so it's brought in Sforim that this is not going to be right away at the beginning. There are several eras in the time of Mashiach. So again, the question is back: how was the Kohen Gadol and the people with him that are raising the question, the Urim V'Tumim, permitted to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Rebbe says he hasn't seen this question anywhere. He hasn't seen anywhere this inyan discussed. Rebbe says he would suggest the answer that there's a rule in the Rambam, that the Rambam in his halachas only tells us halachas which he has a source for. Whether it is in Mishnah, Bavli, Yerushalmi, or even in Tshuvas Hagoynim, the Rambam must have a source for whatever he tells us. The Rambam stays away from creating a chidush, from saying something new which he doesn't have a source for. Even though we find in the Rambam many times an expression of yirali, where the Rambam says, it seems to me so and so, but even this yirali is also relying on a Gemara or on another source which the Rambam has to rely on. This inyan, that the Rambam should stress that it is permitted, that's what comes out from here, that it was permitted for the Kohen Gadol, when he had to ask a question to him, to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and together with him those that had the question, because they went along together with him, as the Rambam describes. This is a tremendous chidush. It's something new, and it has no source in Gemara. There's nothing mentioned about it, neither Bavli, neither Yerushalmi, or in Tshuvas Hagoynim, or in Mishnah, or anywhere. So therefore, the Rebbe says it seems that that's why the Rambam did not want to make an issue of it or bring it to our attention, because it is a tremendous chidush. It's something new, and the Rambam stays away from saying new things that don't have a source. As far as the Mishnah and Pirkei Avos, and today we are beginning again the first Perek. As it's mentioned in Svarim, that for those that say Pirkei Avos in the entire summer, there's an abbreviation of Nefesh. Nefesh means a soul, but that we begin Pirkei Avos in the Sedres of Nefesh. Nosai, that's the first Shabbos after Shavuos usually. Pinchas, which is today, and Parsha Shoftim. For those that recite Pirkei Avos also during the summer weeks, it is begun each time on this cycle of Nefesh. Rebbe, when he mentioned it previously, I think it was in Parshas Nosei, the Rebbe stressed, because whatever we recite in Pirkei Avos is something which is very meaningful to our Nefesh, to our soul. Pirkei Avos, the first Perek, begins with Moshe Kibul Torah Misinai, which stresses how Torah was given over from generation to generation, and that it all originated from Moshe, who was the one that received it from Sinai. In this Perek, we find the Mishnah, the rule of Asay L'cha Rav. And the Mishnah of Asay L'cha Rav is mentioned twice in this Perek. Here the Rebbe spoke again about the importance of everyone having a Rav, somebody that he discusses his inyanim with, and how helpful this is, and we should not let ourselves be misled by anyone who talks us out of having our Rav. And on the contrary, many positive inyanim can be achieved and accomplished by the fact that we have a Rav, and many undesirable and unwanted inyanim have occurred through those that did not choose a Rav. And the Rebbe stressed, Asay L'cha Rav. What is the diuk in the Mishnah Asay L'cha Rav? It has to be a Rav that controls you l'cha, to you. Somebody, you have to choose a Rav, somebody that is designed to you. And he dedicates himself to you, and he guides you and gives you guidance to make sure that everything you do in all matters are inyanim that are proper inyanim. Not to be misled by relying on your own self. And here the Rebbe spoke again very strong words about the inyan of Avas Yisrael and the importance of Avas Yisrael. And this Mishnah of Asay L'cha Rav, we are told in Pirkei Avos, which is Mila de Chasidusa. We know the Gemara tells us that Pirkei Avos are advice of Chasidus. And in what Seder of Mishnayos is Pirkei Avos? It's in the Seder of Nezikin. Which means, the Rebbe says, if we neglect an Asay L'chorav, it can Chas v'Sholem lead to Nezikin, it can Chas v'Sholem lead to Nezek, to harm. And on the other hand, what it has to be is V'ahavta l'reyacha kamoicha. And not in a way that people get a special satisfaction when they have stories and about other people, and they go ahead and they want to show that they really know what's going on, and they are aware of all the news that's taking place. So by showing that they are up to date, they go over to their friend and they say, "Aha! You know what I could tell you? I could tell you something like this and like this. By the fact that you are saying something like this and like this, you are creating a hatred between one Jew and the other. This is something which is not leading to V'ahavta l'reyacha kamoicha, but on the contrary, this is leading to rechilas. A hoylech rogil, meaning carrying from one to another, which this is not Avos Yisrael. On the contrary, you are separating between reyacha and kamoicha, between one Jew and another. And each time this is done, the Rebbe says, the Rebbe explains in Tanya, that each time a Yid does an Aveirah, it's like he's taking a rope and he's adding another layer and another layer to the rope. The same each time we are transgressing in this union of Avos Yisrael, we are making the pirut, the separation between one Yid and another, and between us and the Rebishter, larger and larger. And the Mela, we have to take into consideration the consequences that this brings. And what has to be is Avos Yisrael, and not, Rebbe says, those that make different calculations, they begin thinking to themselves that they are going to outsmart. And by outsmarting, whom do they outsmart? They don't outsmart anybody. There's a vote from one of the Rabbeim that whom do we fool? We don't fool nobody. Somebody else, we don't fool. Because the other people usually know the truth. So whom do we fool? We fool ourselves. I think it's one of the Rabbeim, I think he said it's the name of the Rebbe Marash. Rebbe Marash said in Yiddish, is a kunz, as a nar, nart op a nar. So what's the big deal when one fool fools a fool? So whom are we really fooling? We're fooling ourselves. We're not fooling anybody. Especially when we do it once and a second time and a third time, when we get involved and we think we are building up a chazakah, doing something 3 times, in fooling. Whom are we fooling again? We're fooling ourselves. But what should be that we should be members in the army of Melchemes Beis David, and members in the army of Melchemes Beis David, the Yoitzin, the Noitzchin. We go out in our war and we are successful. We overcome in the war. The Rebbe is mentioning this medrash because he mentioned it recently a few times. That there's a medrash that says that amongst the soldiers of David HaMelech, they were dalturim, meaning people that carried stories from one on another. Same idea of Hilchei Ragel. So the medrash uses the expression Hayurotzin v'noiflin, Rachmana litzlan. That those people, they would run, they were part of the army, in the army they were running. But the noiflin, however, they would fall. When they didn't succeed, they fell, and they were not successful. However, when we will be true soldiers in the army of David HaMelech, what is the army of David HaMelech? That's the army of bringing Mashiach Tzidkenu. And we will be there in a sense with true Avos Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael, and there wouldn't be no union of Dalturin and Hilchei Ragel carrying rechilas from one on another, which all of this is contrary to Avos Yisrael. Then it will be Yoitzim b'Mulchama. We will go out in the battle, the Noitzchin, and we will have an Netzach, and we will overcome the battle successfully. Abu Tavach.
But why?
Yeah. You didn't learn to Machir.
Yeah, I mean, coming from Mechler means coming from It means not.
So the child, Rashi is a The Rebbe many times uses an expression for the Talmud HaMemulach, like for the bright student, who's going to go in deep. For the child who's learning, he's learning. This is what David said. But for the one who really wants to understand, why does Rashi call David? What's he doing?
He does bring it over. The Rambam, he does make it. I mean, he mentions it.
The Rambam but the Rambam should have said that this is something.
He didn't make a big deal on it. Just like there, he used to make it up.
Muslims was descended from Guatemala. Yes. So how could he become a convert?
I can't give you this.
Israel he wasn't like a convert. But he descended from generations back.
Doesn't it say that like a person was not a Kohen, like if his mother wasn't Jewish, he couldn't become a Kohen, and also his father wasn't.
No, but I don't know who his father was. It seems like his mother was, but this was something exceptional. Pinchas was given a gift, even under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have been a Kohen, because all those that were born by Aaron late. And we read in Rashi, those who were born, who were already born, when the Rebbe gave Aaron Kahuna, the Rebbe did not give them Kahuna, they wouldn't have been Kohen. But it's just through this act, and as a reward of this act which he did here, that the Rebbe gave him Kahuna, so could be he waived other exceptions also.
Okay, and it says like, it said, I read somewhere where it said that Pinchas did not ask about what to do about this. It says he asked about it, and Moshe said you couldn't wait to let it carry on. But so he did ask.
No, all he came to church, he said, Mekublani, Mipi Rabbi, didn't you teach us that this and this is what should be done? In other words, the Rebbe also learned elsewhere. Pinchas Alpidin, see, Alpidin Bezin couldn't kill him. It's just Kanoim Poigenbay, the one who feels that he wanted to protect the covenant of Hashem, he has the right to do it. So he came to Moshe and he said, didn't you teach us Habayil Aram is
Oh, so if you would have asked, they couldn't give him permission because it would be like
it's a halacha furthermore. It's a halacha. If you ask a Rav, the halacha they ain't moirin came. It's a halacha, but if you go ask a question, you don't get an answer.
Okay, we do. Okay, how? Okay, if there were Shabbat that were not so conscious how could it be that there were some Shabbat that were not?
In the body, there's the head, there's feet, there's everything in the body. The same thing God's wants anything. What do you mean? Akbash. Okay. So the Aleph is, but he has to elevate the top to the Aleph. Base is secondary, Pesach corresponding to Shabbos.